Lucky Cyan is a character that can be summed up in one word: tragic. Even her power, the blessing that is bestowed upon her, is nothing more than a constant reminder of the misfortune that changed her life forever and separates her from everyone else, leaving her isolated and all alone. In this video, we're going to be analyzing Lucky Cyan's character and To Be Hero X Episode 8 as a whole, as well as theorizing what is going to be coming in the near future, and how Lucky Cyan might affect it, along with what she might represent. Because I think her character is the best commentary so far on our own world and the mistreatment of celebrities and child stars, while also being much different from any hero that we've followed so far, giving us new insight into the world of To Be Hero X and a fresh perspective on how society's worship of heroes affects different people. So to get started, I think we should begin at the very place that Lucky Cyan's story really begun, which is the horrific plane crash that killed her parents as well as all passengers on board except for Cyan herself. This moment is really interesting because it seems to be the birth of Cyan's supernatural luck, which is constantly in effect from this point onwards. However, getting into a plane crash to begin with is often seen as one of the most unlucky things that can happen to a person. So I think it's safe to assume that prior to the crash, Cyan was just a normal girl, and her newfound power was the very reason that she was the lone survivor, which raises a very important question, being why did she gain the power and why was it luck specifically that she gained in what was an incredibly unlucky situation? Well, to figure that out, I think we need to start with why she gained powers in general. And obviously, we don't have a concrete answer for this at the moment. But since we know already that Cyan likely didn't have powers prior to boarding the plane, we can infer that she gained her abilities due to the belief of people who were on the plane. And honestly, I see two main ways that To Be Hero X could go about explaining this. She could have gained her powers because she did something selfless or brave right before the plane crashed, causing her to gain the trust and belief of all those on board right before they met their demise. Or, what is much more likely in my opinion, is that Cyan's parents, who we know died in the crash, put all of their faith in their daughter, and had so much belief in her and what she could become that they alone gave her enough trust value to be saved from the crash, which is both extremely heartbreaking and beautiful. But now that we've tackled how Cyan might have got her powers, we need to understand why she got the power that she did. And I think the answer to this question is something that has already been implicitly revealed to us. If you pay really close attention, you can see that every hero so far has gotten a power that directly contradicts them. Yang Chang is the best example of this, because before becoming Isol, he was slow in every way. He was too slow to ask Xiaoqing out, he was too slow to prevent Pomelo from being kidnapped, and most importantly, he was too slow to save Shang Chao. But the power that he gains by becoming Isol is all about being fast, which can be seen as an ironic representation of the opposite of what he used to be. The same is true for Linling as well. It's just not as directly visible because Nice's power is far more vague. But the very idea of Nice is that of this hero who is perfect in every way and always does exactly as he is told, which is the exact opposite of Linling, who is viewed as a good-for-nothing loser and even after becoming nice, constantly does the opposite of what others tell him to. So if we follow this logic, it makes perfect sense that the person whose entire life was changed forever due to an event that was caused purely by bad luck would get the power to always be incredibly lucky. It's this really cool and kind of traumatic sense of irony that seems to determine what kind of power heroes get. And now that we've talked about the origin of Lucky Cyan's power, I think we need to dive into what she as a character represents. But before we do that, I really quickly want to ask that if you like this video or any of my other videos, that you would consider subscribing. Obviously, it's free and it's my goal to hit 1,000 before summer ends, and I truly believe that we can hit that and even far surpass it. Now with the shameless plug out of the way, I claimed in the intro that Cyan is completely different from any hero that we followed so far. And that's because, as I've talked about in a past video, Linling and Yao Cheng are nearly identical characters that go through very similar things but come to very different conclusions, while Cyan is just in her own world. And even though I mean that from a storytelling standpoint, it is also true in a literal sense, because Cyan's power turns her into this object that people worship and, even more than that, use. She is completely dehumanized by nearly every person in her life, and as a result, all their praise and thankfulness leave her with is nothing but loneliness and sadness. This is clearly To Be Hero X's way of criticizing society and pop culture, as it has been doing throughout the entire series. But in Cyan's case, it's clear that the show's criticism is aimed more specifically towards child stars and the trauma that they face, since Cyan is the only hero so far to gain a high trust value at an extremely young age and deal with the consequences that follow. These consequences are depressing and soul-crushing, but unfortunately, they are also very realistic, since child stars are often mistreated by their management, directors, co-workers, and even parents. They also tend to have their childhoods stripped away from them, which we can see is the exact problem that Cyan is facing. All she wants is to be a normal kid that can play with others and create connections with other people. But it's impossible for her when every person she meets sees her as a tool to gain good fortune. Everybody knows of Cyan, but no one knows who she really is, putting her in this terrible position where she must constantly maintain expectations and be what people expect her to be, all without gaining any of the friendships or real support that normally comes along with such things. And again, this is clearly To Be Hero X's way of criticizing the exploitation of child stars and famous people as a whole, most of which play a role that is beloved and popular on TV or social media, while the people behind the screen feel more alone and isolated than you could ever imagine. And one thing that I really want to point out is that this is another example of TBHX's signature use of irony, because Lucky Cyan is a character who we know from the events of Linling and Yao Cheng's stories brings people together through music and performances, all while she herself feels completely alone and disconnected from everyone else. However, towards the end of episode 8, we see that there is one exception to Cyan's loneliness, and that's a boy named Lao, which once again is ironic because he is incredibly unlucky, the complete opposite of Cyan. And it's partly because of this that Lo is able and willing to see Cyan for the person that she truly is, rather than the tool that most people view her as. And I think it's important to recognize that Cyan is sort of saved by Lo, because until he comes along, she is hopeless, bottling up her feelings and living in agony. But with his help, she's able to break through and be free from the expectations and pressures that are put on her. And the reason that I think this is so important is because each hero's journey we followed so far has had a similar relationship. Linling does for Moon what Lao does for Cyan, and Xiao Qing does her very best to do the same for Yao Cheng, but is unfortunately unable to. And I think the reason that this is a continuous pattern in the show is to stress the importance of genuine relationships, and how they are the key to being free from society's expectations and pressures, which is the true antagonist of To Be Hero X. And now that I've gotten to ramble about symbolic meanings and messages of To Be Hero X, we can end off on something a bit more concrete, which is what is going to happen in the next episode. My last To Be Hero X prediction was surprisingly incredibly accurate, and even though I doubt lightning will strike twice in the same spot, I still want to give it a shot. I think there's a really good chance that Lao will have something bad happen to him, whether that's him dying or sacrificing himself in some way so that Cyan can escape. And honestly, that isn't really much of a prediction. It seems to be more of a pattern based on To Be Hero X's track record of treating beloved side characters. But to make a much more unlikely and more entertaining prediction, I have a feeling that Leo is going to play a much bigger role in the story. I think he's going to accept fear, as the protester told him, and end up being consumed by the power that fear brings, causing him to possibly start the Spotlight organization and or help Cyan escape for his own motives.